Alia, and what you see on your screens right now are visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi concluding his visit to the UAE. He's departed for the Netherlands, which is his next stop in this 5-country tour that he's embarked upon, the UAE being the first, and a visit of enormous significance. It was a short one, but a very important one indeed, because it directly concerns our energy security during some very difficult times as a direct consequence of what's been happening in West Asia. The war that's unfolded there, the choking of the Strait of Hormuz, and the very fact that energy supplies coming through that extremely important strategic region have pretty much been choked for a very long time over the last 2.5 months, ever since the war broke out on the 28th of February. That's had a direct impact here in India as well, and we witnessed for the very first time in almost 4 years a fuel price hike here. The prices of petrol as well as diesel increased by 3 rupees per litre. Now, there were several important agreements that were signed during Prime Minister Modi's brief stay in the UAE, which includes an agreement on the framework for strategic defence partnership between the two countries, a memorandum of understanding also signed on strategic petroleum reserves as well, an agreement on supplies of LPG. Remember that the UAE remains a high supplier, a very important supplier of LPG to India and also LNG as well. There was an MOU that was signed on the setting up of ship repair cluster in Gujarat's Vadinar area as well. And investments worth $5 billion have been announced by the UAE in Indian infrastructure and RBL Bank and Samman Capital as well. So these are 5 very important agreements that were signed during the course of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit. Discussions taking place between him and his UAE counterparts on a whole host of issues. And also remember that very soon after the Prime Minister had landed in Abu Dhabi and he was accorded a Guard of Honor, the Prime Minister made a brief statement where he condemned the attacks that have been inflicted upon the United Arab Emirates during the course of this conflict. Remember, the civilian infrastructure that has also been targeted on the part of Iran during this conflict, and the Prime Minister condemned it, of course, not naming Iran during that speech, but nevertheless sending a very strong message to Iran as well as, of course, the UAE during this conflict, that India stands with the United Arab Emirates and condemns the attack that it has been at the receiving end of. So those are some visuals now that you see of interactions between Prime Minister Modi and Mohammed bin Zayed, among a whole host of other dignitaries who were there to also receive him at the time that he landed. This is, of course, during the time of his departure, and his next stop happens to be the Netherlands, after which he proceeds to Norway, Sweden, and eventually Italy. We also have Ambassador Suresh Goyal now joining us. Many thanks, Ambassador Goyal, for speaking to Times Now and sharing your perspective on the significance of a very brief visit to the United Arab Emirates, a brief stopover, one could say, but one that is filled with enormous significance for the number of agreements that we've signed, and is extremely challenging times pertaining to the kind of energy crisis that we've been witnessing as a direct consequence of what's been happening in West Asia. What are the key takeaways from this short visit that you've seen so far, Ambassador Goyal?
Energy security, investment, and strategic partnerships elevated to the level of deeper strategic considerations, given the fact that the Gulf security itself is under severe attack, and what has happened in Iran is not limited to Iran. It is changing the whole world, really. So the partnership is important, not just from energy point of view, but from a more intensive strategic consideration.
And Ambassador Goyal, just as a follow-up to that, now there's an MOU that's been signed between the two countries on strategic petroleum reserves. This is also, of course, all happening in the backdrop of another very important development in the Middle East that's not received perhaps its due attention, sir, which is the fact that the UAE has decided to quit OPEC. So in your perspective, sir, how does that actually increase our flexibility in terms of the kind of negotiations that we can have with our counterparts in the UAE with respect to the import of crude, LNG as well as LPG?
I don't think we should rush into an OPEC versus non-OPEC consideration. UAE has left OPEC clearly with an idea to become more flexible in terms of petroleum pricing and the petroleum resources and the target countries for the exports. And therefore, India can use that opportunity. But how this dynamics is going to evolve, please don't forget that Saudi Arabia is a very important OPEC member and also an oil supplier. And Saudi Arabia is not going to let it go in just like that. And therefore, before this entire issue of OPEC, non-OPEC oil evolves into a stiff political contest, fight within the Gulf, I think we should really need to evaluate the whole situation very carefully. But in the meantime, develop relations with UAE, take advantage, build a strategic reserve, and watch the Gulf politics and the Gulf dynamics more carefully.
Sticking with the same issue, but a slightly different dynamic to all of this is also the parallel discussions that we've witnessed between President Trump and President Xi Jinping in China as well, Ambassador Goel. What's happening there? Because no clarity has emerged over the future fate of the Strait of Hormuz in particular. One would have expected China, or at least have Trump tell China or try to convince China about the importance of freeing up the Strait of Hormuz, given the extent of reliance that China also places on imports from Iran. There's no clarity emerging there. So are we in a state of limbo continually as far as the Strait of Hormuz is concerned?
If you look at China versus USA, only from the prism of the Straits of Hormuz, and therefore think that because there is no opening or there is no agreement to the Straits of Hormuz, and therefore the visit has no value, I think that would be a mistake. China has given clear signal to the USA that China cannot be taken for granted, that China is a rising power, China will occupy its legitimate role and do things. And therefore, I think it's a contest which is inevitable. We have to watch it now.
All right, we'll wait and see as to how things unfold. Many thanks, Ambassador Goel, for joining us and sharing your perspective with us.